Welcome to the Time to Practice podcast. This is a space where we talk about music practice, the ups and downs that young musicians go through related to practice and learning music, and how we as parents, caregivers, and music educators can support the young musicians in our lives, support ourselves, and support each other. My name is Christine Goodner. I'm a music educator, author, and podcaster who has made it my mission to talk about music practice and to support educators and families looking to make home practice more effective and to reduce conflict and frustration in the practice room. I'm glad you're here. This episode is brought to you by my books for families of music students. First, Beyond the Music Lesson, which is for those who are just getting started or who want to go back to basics and reset things a bit at the start of the year. Positive Practice, which is a workbook for problem-solving music practice, especially pain points for young students. And then Music Practice Makeover, which is meant for those who have been into music lessons for a while and have been practicing for a while and are looking for further strategies beyond the beginning phases and to help families understand more about what makes practice work for their individual child. You can find my books at bookshop.org, barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, or through my website, suzukitriangle.com/books. Thanks for supporting the work of this podcast anytime you purchase my materials. Well, welcome everyone. We are kicking off the new year of 2026. If you're listening to this episode right when it first comes out with our expert guest, frequent friend of the podcast, Barbie Wong. Barbie, thanks for being here today.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And the topic we're going to tackle today comes out of just a conversation Barbie and I were having between the two of us about supporting our students. And people do ask us a lot, our own students, other parents, about how to make more progress in lessons or how to help their child practice effectively. And we wanted to talk about the topic of deliberate practice versus playing through. And I think it's a really good one. And I'll just kick off by defining deliberate practice. It was coined by a psychologist, Anders Ericsson, and it really means practicing with a purpose, systematic practice, putting our focused attention on something versus mindless repetitions. And really having the goal of improving something in the work that we do. So that's not to say there's not a place in playing music for playing through for the enjoyment of it and just playing or noodling around or I'm going to give a mock performance. That's different than what we're talking about. We're talking about, we say like, let's go in the practice room and get some work done or put some effort into doing our assignments for our teachers at our next lesson, that kind of thing. And what does it mean to really practice deliberately? So thanks for talking about this with me today, Barbie.
Oh, yes, this is a juicy topic.
Absolutely, absolutely. What I'm just curious what thoughts you have just right off the bat and what comes to mind for you thinking about this topic.
Well, I love the work of Anders Ericsson, and he wrote a fantastic book. So if anybody listening wants to know more, he wrote a book called Peak, P-E-A-K, and it just details it's pretty easily read. It has great stories. But the one thing he says is deliberate practice is not easy. In fact, it's hard. And he says if you're actually practicing and it's easy, you're not doing deliberate practice. So that's the one thing that I think, which is it's really difficult for a lot of us to think about. And something I didn't really understand when my children were young and I was practicing with them. I kept wondering, like, why is this so hard? Why aren't they just having a good time? And once I learned about deliberate practice and how that's how you acquire skills, that's how you learn a musical instrument, then I realized, oh, okay, my mindset was completely off. So I think a lot of times when parents are wondering, like, why is my child struggling? Why are they resisting practice? Or teachers are like, why doesn't my student like to practice? It's like, well, actually, if they don't like to practice, the chances are they're actually doing it correctly because it's hard. And because practice is hard, most kids actually don't like deliberate practice. So that's sort of a difficult thing, I think, for a lot of us to think about. But if we kind of take away the shiny veneer of like music is fun and look inward into the nitty-gritty details, like deliberate practice is where it's at. And it's not the funnest thing in the world. But there is hope. And we're gonna talk about what to do about that.
Yes. And I think before even we talk about what to do, I think one thing I like from our conversations we've had on the podcast and off the podcast, I like the way that you talk about having a balance between this deliberate practice we're talking about and playing for enjoyment. Because if it's all deliberate practice and like you're saying, like hard, effort, then it makes sense that it would sort of squash some motivation or kids who don't understand why they're doing it or the long-term outcome, or they're not going to read Anders Ericsson's book themselves and understand what we're talking about at a very young age. So I do think that balance of we're not saying to do this at the expense of ever just playing for enjoyment, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you want the balance. I think what ends up happening is most people uh, just think, oh, well, practice is supposed to be fun, and only then focus on the your easier parts or playing in a sloppy way, and then sort of neglect the difficult parts. Of course, there are also people who might have their children play only the difficult things. And so, yeah, you're right, Christine, that there's a balance. And in fact, actually, in that book, Anders Ericsson does talk about how you need to find what he calls the sweet spot, where you're pushing the brain outside of its comfort zone, but not so much outside that you get to the point where you can't really learn. So he says the best learning does happen in that sweet spot.
Hmm. Yeah, it reminds me. I think Daniel Coyle in his book, The Talent Code, talks a lot about that too. If it's overwhelming, it sort of kills our motivation, and we're trying to find this kind of right in the edge of
Yeah.
what pushes us, but doesn't make it too much. So let's talk about deliberate practice and what that might look like. And this, just as a very simple introduction to thinking about this, is as a teacher, I often isolate spots for my students. Here's the practice spot, and I think finding those spots that your teachers identified or that might become very obvious when you're practicing at home, like, okay, things are going well until we get to this spot, right? And so I think isolating those spots and then coming at them with different strategies for practice is one pretty simple way, or like first step way to think about doing this.
Yeah, exactly. We want to make sure we go to those particular parts that are not going so well, or the child hasn't learned yet to play it accurately. And and often I think a lot of children, if they're visual, it's kind of nice if if you have a way to set up a practice chart of sorts, or even a list, like, oh, these are the tasks for practice, maybe it's listed on something, and then let's make sure that you practice measures 3 to 5, 5 times with correct fingering. And when that has been done, maybe a little check mark can be placed on there. So then the child goes, oh, okay, now that's done. Okay, now I have 4 more things to do in my practice. Some children really need that visual reminder of like, I have this to do, then this, okay, then I'll be done. Because we don't want children to just, oh, I guess I'll play this a little, and then let me see when the timer's up. But they haven't gone through the actual list. We want them to get through the list, and getting through the list is what deliberate practice is all about.
Exactly. And if you can manage to get through half the list, then you've checked off and okay, next practice, let's make sure we get to the other part of the list that we didn't make it to. So yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes parents practicing with young children is helpful. Maybe their child isn't looking at the list and doesn't care about that, but it would help you to make sure, oh, we've covered all these spots. Our child's really young. We're checking off for ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And I have to say that I really love this thing that I learned from a friend of mine who's a Suzuki teacher, Kathy Brown. She has what she calls the 100 Club. And so it's just a sheet of paper and it has 100 boxes. And she'll just assign her students sometimes one thing that they're supposed to practice 100 times. Doesn't mean they do it in one week. It's just something that they know, okay, so this area or this piece or something has to be done 100 times. She has said that she will sometimes split it up so that it's like, oh, maybe instead of 100 times, she'll do like 2 pieces and each one is 50. There's a lot of different variations, but she says what's nice is that once that's complete, and the kids can put stickers in there or check marks, she'll actually have them posted in her music studio. So then other kids can see, oh, I'm not the only one who's doing 100 things. All of these other kids are. So that's a nice way to reinforce the deliberate practice.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I like that a lot. And I think also just knowing what to do with those spots to improve them can sometimes be the sticking point for people. And I think this is where a conversation with your teacher, I sometimes I feel like I'm explaining what to do, but it's not. It gets lost somewhere in the it's time to go home and work on this. So definitely ask your teacher if you need more information. But I think just having strategies too, when you get to the spot, it's like, okay, we know the spot. I like highlighting tape. I have some highlighting tape that comes on and off the paper without ripping the paper. And especially with students who are looking at music, yeah, intermediate students. But I think once we get to those spots, then it's like, okay, what are we going to do? What are our strategies? And I think that is the next, maybe layer after identifying the spots and knowing you're going to put those repetitions in. And having that list of strategies is something we build over time with experience.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I love the highlighting tape. I have just small little post-its that we do that
Mm.
in the music too. And then once in a while, I'll also be creative depending on the student. Some students love stories and ideas and things like that. And so I will make up. For instance, I did it actually for my child who loves burritos and loves to eat burritos. And so I remember at some point, and this is probably for like a little more advanced child. I did this for my child when I think my child was like 10, and one piece needed like 8 things that we were working on, which is a lot. But it happened that I was like, okay, well, this spot is your rice. And so we said, this spot at the rice spot, then you need to work on this. Then we're going to have the cheese. Then we're going to have the guacamole. So we just kind of filled out the burrito for the entire piece. And it was just sort of fun for for my child to go, oh, okay, well, I'm going to eat the burrito in this piece. And those were the different spots. So there's different ways to do it. That doesn't have to be just like tedium. You can, make it more playful as well.
Mm. Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. That's a great way to put a story with it. And I think, you and I have talked a lot if we're talking about younger than 10, putting games into practice and using games to help count repetitions. And I think this is the kind of thing that really helps because it also gives the child a visual of we can tell we've made progress, we've done the thing, and it can really help make it feel like we're making something fun out of the repetitions or at least injecting some interest in there. And I have a friend whose son is a percussion performance major in college, and when I saw him, he was excited to tell me that his college professor had assigned them a penny game with 10 pennies, and they were supposed to work on their deliberate practice spots and move the penny across the music stand for each repetition. And I love sharing that story because it's not just small children that this works for. This is like a college professor assignment, right? To get pennies and count repetitions so that the students would be willing to repeat those spots and make the improvements in their assigned practice spots. So I like any way to incorporate games if your child's into that. Uh, and usually in those little counters to help counter times can really make it feel a little less tedious. Like you said, yes, it's hard work. And then I think also one thing we can do as the grown-ups helping children with practice is feel like how do we make that feel more tolerable and less like, oh, I don't want to do this because it's so hard. So I love your burrito story. And I think, physical items to count, there's a lot of ways we can make that move along a little more easily or feel less tedious for our students.
Oh yeah. Oh, most definitely. Yeah, you're right. It doesn't have to be just for young kids. Older kids really enjoy this, and it breaks it up. And I forget this too because I have a 9-year-old, and I just for some reason I just thought, oh, maybe she doesn't need games. And at some point I mentioned, like, would you like to play a game? And her eyes lit up. So I have to remember, okay, it's not just with my 4 and 5-year-olds, but as they age, it's just kind of fun.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of this Suzuki teacher, Hilary Nordwall, she created so many amazing games for her own children and her own students. But what I loved was the popsicle sticks, and it's so easy because popsicle sticks are pretty cheap. What she did was this is for different pieces that needed to be reviewed, and she just wrote each piece on each stick and had 2 cups, and essentially once you took one out, played it, you put it in the other cup. And so it didn't need to be complete, but eventually the idea was, okay, we're going to go through all the pieces. And I can imagine doing this for even different parts
Mm.
of the piece. If you want to do, like measures 5 to 10, and then doing that repetition and then being able to move it to the next cup.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. I was also thinking of just what I've been doing in my teaching this week with my teenagers in the studio. I have this pink sparkly dye that goes up to maybe 9. And so we're just isolating spots and they just roll the die right on the top of the stand. And I say, okay, if it's a 0 or 1, we're rolling again. But that's really, it seems like it's keeping it really interesting. And, sometimes it's like, oh no, I got an 8, but it's only a measure, usually that I'm having them do at a time. But I'm trying to model for them, what does it look like to make this interesting for ourselves? And like, yes, we're going to repeat it. And then I'm coaching them through, of course, and giving them some strategies so that they've got some at their fingertips at home. But that's something I've been using just this week, in fact. And that's a really easy thing to just find a die or two and um, get some repetition going, but making it feel a little bit more like, oh, that's we don't know what the number is going to be. So it makes it a little less boring or tedious.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Putting a little splash of surprise can be
Yeah.
really helpful.
Yeah. Even for ourselves as adults, sometimes, depending on the day and what we need.
Oh, yes.
So before, I think we've given people some ideas of, what this deliberate or targeted practice is and some ways to maybe make it more tolerable. And then I think just to make it effective, what would you say to people who are just looking for strategies or ideas for strategies about what to do when they get to their practice spots?
Well, the practice spots, I think, really trying to figure out what is the main point. For my own students, I try to think about like what's the most important thing, because with music, there's so many different things you could be focusing on. And I also notice that when I tell my students, "Oh, okay, let's work on fingering and phrasing and tempo." I mean, that's too much. So I say, at the very basic part, think about what is most important. Generally, what's most important first are things like the correct notes, the correct rhythms, making sure that the rests are there, and then sort of a little bit on the side. I'm a pianist, so I think about fingering quite a bit, and then eventually, you'll work your way up to other aspects such as, um, you know, hand position and tempo and um, articulation, things of that sort. But if we can think about how do we focus on this one thing, when my students are playing the games too, I always say, okay, we're going to play this game, and in order to win such and such, whatever, like the next penny, your job is to make sure that you're playing this rhythm correctly. And then if they do something else that's not correct, I don't penalize them for that because we're only working on the rhythm. So that's something that makes it much more encouraging. If suddenly they're like, oh no, I have to get every single thing perfect, that's too much. So really breaking it down to digestible chunks is really, really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the idea is with this deliberate practice, those things that you're focusing on now will become sort of second nature, and then you can layer on the other details. But yeah, we don't want to overwhelm. So I like that. I think clearly defining what is the most important thing is really helpful. And like you said, there's that hierarchy of just like bowing. I would throw in there for, string students too, if
Mm-hmm.
after the notes and rhythm. And yeah, probably what you're thinking about with fingering, we're thinking about with bowing a little bit. But
Mm-hmm.
I think just looking for those strategies, like look, watch what your teachers is like one of the reasons. If you're a parent in the lesson with your child, notice what strategy is the teacher using to work on this with your child, not just what to practice, but how is it being practiced in the lesson? What's the teacher introducing as ideas? Sometimes just looking for that. Or if we have an older child and they are like, I don't know how I'm supposed to practice it, and they feel stumped, it's like, okay, let's ask your teacher for some strategies. You can reach out and ask for help. I think there's a lot of different ways to practice and ideas out there. We had Dr. Cora Cooper come on the podcast, and she had this whole flow chart. I'm going to show it up and hold it up and show Barbie, but it's all these what's going wrong in practice, and then what are the strategies to improve the thing, on the violin at least. And I'll link to her episode in the show notes because she made that available for people to download. There's also Molly Gebrian's great book about music practice, and there's some strategies in there. Some of these are high level ideas, and maybe when our child is younger, we're going to simplify from this elaborate chart. So we don't want to overwhelm ourselves if we're trying to help our child with practice either. But there's a lot of strategies out there, I guess, is my point. And as our child gets older, if you're not in the lesson with them, there's places they can look or places their teacher can refer them to look if they're stumped on those. What do I do to improve this spot?
there's a lot I think that goes on in the teacher's mind as they're trying to figure out what to work on with each student. So it might be good if you're a parent and you're wondering like why are we doing this? What's happening? To ask the teacher because the teacher might be trying to do something and it might look different. And then I also recommend making video recordings. Actually, there are times when I, as the teacher, will say, okay, let's record this so you can see what we're doing when you're back home practicing. Because sometimes just I can't put the words down that will actually describe what to do. There's so many things. And if I say something, sometimes it becomes, I don't know, it's not translated very well. For instance, in piano, a lot of times we'll have this idea of having curved fingers. But if you tell students that, a lot of times they kind of make a claw and there's a lot of tension. So saying curved fingers isn't always the best way to achieve what you want to achieve. The best way actually is just to hold the child's hand and then kind of mold them and then to feel how soft it is, in the palm as they're putting their hands on the keys. So yeah, I think videos can probably be the best substitute for what happens in the lesson.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great idea too. Absolutely. Well, any final thoughts you want to leave listeners with from you, Barbie, about the idea of deliberate practice or targeted practice before we go today?
Yeah, I think I just want people to think about that this is not an easy thing, and it's okay if you have a child, if you have a student or your own child, just is not excited about this. I was not excited about practice when I was a kid, and there are still some days when I look at practice and I say, "Oh, I want to learn this piece," and okay, I'm gonna have to just buckle down. I'm gonna have to make sure my mind that I have enough energy so that I can actually focus. So it does take a lot, and to realize that it's a skill. Being able to practice, being able to do the deliberate practice does take some time to build up. So if you have a child who isn't there yet, that's okay. Just every day by day, little bit by bit, it can happen. And when it happens, it's actually so wonderful. And there's so much joy I can see in my students' faces when they play that piece that they've been working on for so long, and they've done the deliberate practice, and it sounds amazing. So it'll be worth it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So I guess if I could sum up, because we've had a lot to say, if you're a parent listening to this, find that balance, give your child time just to play for their own enjoyment and to play through things and have less structure, of course. And then but we want it not to be all or nothing of either of these two things. And then we're going to identify spots to practice or things to improve, have a way to track what those are and that you're getting to them. And we have a lot of creative ideas to share with you. We're going to apply practice strategies. Your teacher will help you with that. And there's a lot of ideas out in the world about practice strategies themselves. And then I love what you said there, Barbie, is just remember this is a skill. And I think as students get older, and they see the advantage, like this was hard, but look how amazing it feels to play this piece now, or look what I think people really start to love the process. It can feel like putting together a puzzle or solving a puzzle of some kind. It's like, okay, I'm going to find my spots. I'm going to apply these strategies. And I think as musicians get more advanced and more experienced with practice, they start to enjoy this more. Even if it feels hard, it feels like satisfying at the same time. And so I think knowing that that will happen and that we're just early in the process if our child's really not there yet, knowing that we'll get there and your teacher wants to help you, and ultimately this kind of practice really pays off. It's worth working on. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Barbie, for being here again this month. It's always a pleasure to have you join us.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Christine.
And happy practicing, everyone. Have a great week.